The arrow drifted alone through a sea without stars. Its fletching was pale as moonlight, its shaft carved from the heart of an ancient Malorn. No bowstring had loosed it. No hand had guided it. It simply was a fragment of another tale torn free and cast into a night beyond comprehension. Legolas followed it, or perhaps he was bound within it, his spirit tethered to that single symbol of his people's craft, of his own mastery. Around him stretched not the skies of Middle-earth nor the distant shores of the west, but an ocean of unreality, a churning void where time writhed like a wounded serpent. Colors bled into one another without meaning. Violets that hissed, greens that screamed, scarlets that pulsed like open wounds. This was not the sea that carried elves to the undying lands. This was the warp. Legolas did not know its name, but he felt its hunger. Shadows without form coiled through the madness, pressing against him, testing the strength of his will. They whispered in voices that seemed half-remembered. His father's command, Aragorn's laughter, Gimli's gruff challenge. Each was twisted hollow, filled with promises of power or ruin. He pressed on, eyes fixed upon the drifting arrow. Its light was steady. The void shuddered. A vast pressure settled upon him, as though the entire ocean had turned to stare. He felt it as instinct, like a hunter sensing another predator in the wood. This gaze was no mortal thing. It was ancient, bottomless, and hungry. The elf prince tightened his grip on the bow he carried. Though no forest grounded him, though the air itself was madness, his hand was steady. He whispered in his own tongue, a song of the green woods of Mirkwood, the rustle of leaves, the memory of dawns unmarred by shadow. For a moment the darkness recoiled. Then, as if answering his defiance, a rift tore open before him. The warp peeled apart like flesh beneath a blade, revealing not peace but fire. A world stretched below, scarred, broken, its surface veiled in clouds of ash. Cities lay shattered into jagged teeth of stone. Rivers of molten glass ran across plains stripped bare, and above it all, hanging like carrion birds, were the remnants of colossal vessels, starships, though Legolas could not name them, broken hulks drifting like corpses in orbit. The arrow plummeted toward the burning sphere. Legolas followed. The descent was not flight, but falling through screams. Warp lightning clawed at him, shapes of beasts that had never lived reached out, only to dissolve into smoke as his arrow's glow cut them away. Then came air, choking, metallic, searing his lungs. Heat pressed against his skin, ash clung to his golden hair, and the sky was the color of dried blood. He struck the earth upon the ruins of a cathedral. The impact shuddered through stone, yet he rose lightly, as though stepping down from a high branch. His boots touched the cracked sigil of a two-headed eagle, its wings blackened with soot. Bells hung shattered in the spire above, their bronze tongues fallen silent. For a long moment he stood listening. There were no birds, no rivers, no rustle of leaves. Only the groan of distant metal, the crackle of unseen fires, and faintly the murmur of prayer carried on the poisoned wind. He knocked an arrow. Instinct. Though he saw no foe, every fiber of his being told him this land was hunted. Through the smoke figures emerged, men and women, gaunt, clothed in rags of once proud uniforms. Their faces bore the grey pallor of starvation, their eyes wide with disbelief. They beheld him as though a vision, tall, fair, clad in mail that gleamed even beneath soot-stained skies, hair like sunlight through fog. One fell to his knees, another whispered a single word, alien to Legolas' ears, yet heavy with reverence, Angelus. More voices joined, trembling, fervent, until the ruined square filled with hushed prayers. Some reached toward him with trembling hands, others pressed foreheads to broken stone. Legolas lowered his bow, though he did not relax. He understood none of their speech, yet he felt the weight of their eyes, the desperate hope they poured into him. It was not unlike how mortals once looked upon the Eldar in ages past, fearful, reverent, believing them more than flesh. But behind that reverence was terror, not of him, of something else. He turned his gaze eastward. There, beyond the crumbled walls of the cathedral city, the horizon seethed. Clouds twisted unnaturally, as though stirred by vast wings. A sound trembled on the wind, not thunder, not storm, but a chittering chorus, like countless mandibles clicking in hunger. The elf's breath slowed. He had heard the calls of wolves, the roars of trolls, the battle cries of orcs. None chilled him as this sounded, for it carried no malice, no rage, only hunger. Endless, consuming hunger. The arrow that had guided him here flickered once more in his vision, now lodged in the cracked stone before him. Its point faced outward, toward the horizon where the sound grew louder. Legolas drew it free, the fletching whispering against stone. He placed it to his bowstring, testing the weight. The balance was perfect, yet even as he did, he knew this arrow was not meant for beasts of his own world. It had been carried through fire and nightmare for something else entirely. The earth trembled beneath his feet. Dust cascaded from the shattered arches above. The chittering grew nearer. Legolas raised his eyes to the ashen horizon, his bow ready, his mind steady. He did not yet know the name of the enemy that approached. He did not know the scale of the war into which fate had cast him. But he felt it in his bones as surely as the sun once rose over the greenwood. Whatever came was vast beyond reckoning, and it was coming for him. The cathedral bells, long silent, gave a single broken toll. The horizon bled with fire. Even through the grey pall of ash that veiled the sky, the glow of distant conflagrations could be seen, burning lines across the land like the scars of some vast, unseen claw. The world was dying. Legolas knew it with the certainty of a huntsman reading the forest. No song of renewal lingered here, no hidden spring promising rebirth. This was a land bled dry. He descended from the fractured cathedral steps, his light tread leaving faint prints in the soot that coated the flagstones. Around him, the gaunt survivors who had first beheld him as a vision began to follow, murmuring still, their voices quavering with fear and awe. Though he understood not their words, their eyes spoke enough. They clung to him as though his presence itself were a ward against the terrors that lurked beyond the smoke. A woman, her face streaked with grime, pressed a bundle into his hands, a crust of bread, hard and stale. Her gesture needed no translation. She offered what little remained, though hunger had already hollowed her cheeks. Legolas bowed his head slightly, laying the bread back into her palms with gentle insistence. He did not eat while others starved. Beyond the shattered city square, the ruins spread outward in jagged silence. Towers lay broken across avenues like the fallen trunks of colossal trees. Statues of armored saints and robed martyrs lay face down in dust, their once radiant visages cracked into mute sorrow. Legolas paused before one such monument, a colossal angel wrought of stone, wings shattered, sword snapped in half. He laid a hand upon the weathered surface, feeling the lingering echo of reverence etched into the figure. It was not unlike the statues of the valor he had glimpsed in Numenor's ancient records, yet colder, more martial, an idol of war rather than of beauty. Behind him, the whispers of the crowd grew hushed. Some knelt before the ruined angel, crossing themselves with ritualistic fervor. Others pressed their hands together, whispering litanies into the dust. He realized then that they mistook him not only for a savior, but perhaps for kin to their stone guardians. He could not correct them. He could only observe, silent as the grave world around them. The air shifted. Legolas' ears twitched. Beneath the sullen crackle of distant fires, another sound rose, a rhythmic thunder, heavy, measured, unnatural. It was not the cadence of men marching, nor the fall of hooves. It was deeper, as though the very crust of the world were being pounded by colossal hammers. The refugees froze. Cease. Their eyes widened, and many clutched at symbols hanging around their necks, icons of the two-headed eagle crafted of rusted metal or carved bone. Fear, raw and instinctive, gripped them. Legolas' gaze sharpened toward the east, where the land sloped downward into a plain shrouded in dust. Shapes moved within it, vast, indistinct, shifting with insectile fluidity. For a heartbeat he thought them the swaying of broken trees in a windstorm. Then the ground quivered again, and he saw them more clearly. Towering organisms, their limbs barbed, their bodies ridged with plates of chitin. A tremor of recognition stirred in him, though he had never beheld such things. They were predators, he knew, yet not of any forest or mountain. They moved as a single will, countless bodies, yet one hunger. The people around him cried out. Some fled into the hollows of ruined buildings. Others prostrated themselves, praying desperately to their emperor, as though their devotion might stay the tide. Legolas alone did not falter. He unslung his bow, string taut with a single fluid motion, and knocked the arrow that had followed him from the void. Its point gleamed faintly, even in the ashen gloom. The beasts did not yet charge. They gathered swaying, their clicking mandibles filling the air with a terrible cadence, and above them the sky stirred. Legolas raised his eyes. Enjoy. The clouds broke open, not with storm but with the descent of living vessels. He did not yet comprehend their scale, only that they were immense, shapes like the bones of titanic leviathans, wings that were not wings but membranes stretched across grotesque frames. They drifted closer, blotting out what little sun remained. From their bellies rained spores, globes of pulsing flesh that sank into the soil, splitting open to spill writhing masses onto the ground. The elf's breath deepened. He had faced trolls in the black deeps of Khazad-dûm, had fought orcs beneath the banners of Rohan, had battled alongside Aragorn against the hosts of Mordor. But this was different. There was no rage in these creatures, no malice. They bore only hunger. He could feel it radiating from them, endless, unreasoning, eternal. One of the refugees tugged at his arm, pointing frantically toward a shattered avenue leading deeper into the city. The meaning was clear. Flee. Legolas shook his head slowly. He could not flee. Not while these people had nowhere left to run. He drew the arrow back, its head gleaming like starlight against the ash. The string hummed with tension, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to hold its breath. The smell of ozone filled his nostrils. His keen eyes found the foremost of the creatures, a beast towering thrice the height of a man armored in chitin, its maw dripping with venom. He loosed. The arrow streaked forth a silver whisper in the dark. It struck the beast's eye, sinking deep with unnatural precision. The creature shrieked, a sound that split the air like tearing metal, and toppled into the dust. The plain erupted. The swarm screamed as one, and the ground shook with the force of countless limbs. The Tyranids surged forward in a wave of Ketin and fangs, a tide of flesh rolling toward the broken city. The refugees wailed in terror. Bells clanged faintly in broken towers. And Legolas, standing at the forefront of the cathedral steps, raised his bow again. His voice was steady, though his heart knew the enormity of what approached. "Then let it come," he whispered in the language of his people. The swarm answered with a roar that shook the heavens. The swarm halted, not all at once, but in that strange, rippling way that revealed the unity behind the multitude. From the broken plain came the click and hiss of alien forms, shifting uneasily. Their hunger had not abated, yet something in their advance wavered, as though some unseen will had chosen to hold back. The refugees had no words for such reprieve. Their voices rose in shouts of relief, awe, and frantic prayer. They fell to their knees around Legolas, pressing foreheads to stone and muttering litanies in the name of their emperor. Some turned their eyes directly to him, trembling as though the impossible were laid bare before them. "Legolas," one whispered again, clutching her chest. "The emperor has sent his servant." Others took up the cry, their voices rising, their desperation transfigured into faith. The word echoed across the ruins, bouncing from shattered walls. "Angelus, Angelus, Angelus." Legolas lowered his bow slowly, his expression unreadable. Though he knew none of their tongue, he needed no translation for the weight of their gaze. He had seen it before, in the eyes of mortals who looked upon the Eldar as beings half divine. But here, the reverence was sharpened by terror, honed into a blade of desperate belief. From the smoke came new figures, not ragged survivors, but robed men bearing icons of the two-headed eagle. Their garments were scorched and torn, their incense censers broken, yet they carried themselves with ritual authority. Their leader was a gaunt priest with eyes burning fever-bright, his voice hoarse from endless chanting. When his gaze fell upon Legolas, he froze. Then he dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead to the ash. By the throne the priest rasped, "The angel walks among us." The others echoed him, striking their chest with clenched fists. They chanted praises, weaving Legolas into their liturgy, naming him protector, deliverer, sign of divine mercy. Their fervor filled the square like smoke, suffocating, undeniable. Legolas listened in silence. He felt the power of their devotion pressing upon him, not unlike the weight of the dark gaze he had endured in the void. Only this was different. It was not hunger, but belief, and belief could be as binding as any chain. The priest rose, eyes alight. He approached, holding out a tarnished relic, an eagle wrought of beaten gold, cracked and blackened by flame. He pressed it toward Legolas as though offering the crown of a king. Legolas did not take it. He stood motionless, hands at his side. In his heart stirred unease. He was no angel, no servant of their emperor. Yet if he denied them, if he shattered their fragile hope, what would remain for them in this desolation? The silence stretched. Then softly he placed one hand upon the relic, not in possession but in acknowledgement. The crowd erupted in cries of triumph, their voices rising in a thunder that echoed through the ruined city. The priest turned, arms raised. Behold the emperor's will made flesh. He comes not clad in ceramite, nor wielding bolter, but in the vestments of purity. He has struck down the great devourer with a single arrow, as the saints of old slew beasts with spear and flame. The refugees fell to their knees once more, chanting the emperor's name and Legolas in the same breath. Legolas' gaze strayed back to the plain. The Tyranids still lurked restless, their silhouettes seething in the haze. He could feel their hunger gnawing, restrained only by some unseen purpose. They had not been defeated, merely delayed, and yet these people now believed he alone had stayed the swarm. A child approached, clutching a shard of glass shaped roughly into a blade. His eyes were hollow with fear, but they fixed upon Legolas with fierce devotion. He knelt and offered the shard as though giving a soldier's sword to a commander. Legolas accepted it, though gently, laying the shard upon the ground beside the boy. He rested a hand briefly upon the child's head, an unspoken blessing. The boy's mother wept with gratitude, clutching her son close. The priest's voice cut through the air once more. "We shall not flee. We shall not flee. Not while heaven sends us his champion. The angel shall lead us to victory. The devourer will break upon our faith." The people roared their assent. Broken though they were, their despair had been transfigured into something dangerous. Conviction. Legolas said nothing, yet within him stirred doubt. He had not chosen this mantle. He was no angel, no saint, no weapon of their emperor. He was only a wanderer torn from his world, standing now in the path of something vast and incomprehensible. But as he looked upon their faces, starved, hollow, yet alight with hope, he knew he could not abandon them. Whether angel or outcast, he would not stand aside while the swarm descended. The earth trembled once more. From the haze of the plain came a new sound, a low resonant hum vibrating in the bones. Legolas' keen ears caught it first, and his body tensed. It was not the skittering of claws nor the shriek of Catin. It was deeper, like the murmur of some great choir, though twisted alien. The Tyranids shifted, their swarm parting, and from their midst rose a figure larger than any beast yet seen. Plates of bone ridged across its body like fortress walls. Its head bore a crown of spines, and in its talons it carried living weapons that pulsed with venomous hunger. The hive tyrant had come. The refugees gasped, voices faltering, prayers turning to cries of dread. Even the priest's certainty wavered, his words faltering in the air. Legolas stepped forward, alone. His bow was raised once more, his eyes fixed upon the towering shape. The people's voices fell silent behind him, waiting, clinging to the fragile thread of hope he had unwillingly become. The hive tyrant's gaze found him, and for the first time the swarm screamed as one, an endless chorus of hunger, directed not at the crowd, not at the city, but at him. The air thickened with the scent of blood and ozone. Legolas' fingers brushed the fletching of his next arrow. His breath steadied. He had been named an angel, wrapped in faith not his own. But before him now stood no idol, no worshipper, no priest, only a predator, and he was the prey it hungered for. The hive tyrant did not move at first. It loomed above the plain, a silhouette of hunger carved against the crimson haze, its eyes glowing with a cold, unblinking intelligence. The swarm around it chittered, restless, like the rustle of a forest just before a storm. Legolas felt the weight of its regard pressing upon him, not the simple gaze of predator upon prey, but the focus of a will vast and alien, measuring him, cataloguing him. The refugees trembled, their fragile chants collapsing into silence. Even the priest's words faltered on his lips. The sight of the creature stole language itself from their throats. Legolas' bowstring hummed faintly as he drew it back, arrow ready. Yet he did not release. He knew instinctively that this was not the moment. To strike too soon was to waste his chance. Instead, his keen eyes lifted to the skies above. The heavens had darkened, not from smoke alone, but from something far larger. Beyond the veil of ash, vast shapes drifted, blotting out the dim light of the sun. At first, Legolas thought them storm clouds swollen with unnatural weight, but as the wind shifted he saw their contours. Colossal vessels, grotesque parodies of living whales or leviathans, their surfaces pulsing with veins of ichor, their carapaces ridged like the shells of nightmarish beetles. They glided silently, each the size of a mountain, their forms too immense for his mind to encompass. His breath caught. These were no ships of wood and sail, no vessels of Númenórean craft, not even the iron warships of this imperium. These were alive, living citadels, living storms. The first shadow of the true swarm had fallen upon the world. The ground trembled with new ferocity. Spores rained down from the sky in great clusters, fleshy meteors that struck the earth with wet detonations. Where they landed, the soil split open, birthing new horrors. Smaller beasts that clawed their way from the pods, shrieking, their bodies steaming in the chill ash. The refugees screamed. Some fled into the ruins, their wails echoing through broken streets, but clogged in streets. Others clung to the priest, begging him for deliverance. His eyes were wide, but his voice found strength again, desperation transfigured into command. "Fear not," he cried. He cried, "The angel shall stand, and the emperor's hand shall smite the devourer." His words were hollow thunder compared to the shrieks of birthing Tyranids, yet the people clung to them, for what else could they cling to? Legolas' gaze never left the sky. He could feel the presence of the swarm pressing against his senses, not as words, not even as thought, but as a chorus of hunger that seeped into bone. It was like standing at the edge of a vast abyss and hearing the ocean itself call his name. He loosed his arrow. The shaft streaked upward, silver against the bloody clouds. It struck one of the descending spore pods, piercing its hide with perfect precision. The pod erupted in flame and ichor, scattering its contents in a rain of charred flesh. The people gasped, voices rising once more in cries of hope. The hive tyrant shrieked. The sound split the air, a psychic scream that reverberated not only in the ears but in the mind. Legolas staggered as the alien will brushed against him. It was not rage he felt, it was attention. The creature, and through it the vast mind beyond, had noticed him. The arrow had sung in the void, and the void had answered. The Tyranids surged. From the plain they came, countless forms bounding forward, claws digging into stone, mandibles clashing. The first wave struck the ruins with the force of a living avalanche. Guardsmen who had hidden among the rubble opened fire, their lasguns spitting red beams into the tide. The air filled with the stench of burning chitin and the acrid tang of spent energy cells. But for every creature slain, 10 more surged forward, climbing over their fallen kin without hesitation. Legolas moved like a shadow among the chaos. His bow sang, each arrow finding a throat, an eye, a weak joint in the armor of the beasts. He wove through the falling ash with grace no mortal eye could follow, striking, withdrawing, striking again. His presence was no longer a vision to the survivors, it was a miracle given flesh. Still the tide pressed on. At the heart of it the hive tyrant advanced, its massive strides shaking the ground, its weapons screaming with bioplasma and venom. Every step it took seemed to bend the swarm around it, guiding them, commanding them. Its will was the will of the swarm, its hunger their hunger. Legolas' arrows struck true, but the beast swatted them aside, its hide already hardening, adapting. Each shot that might have felled an orc or troll here did little more than chip the shell of this leviathan. The elf's keen perception caught it at once. The creature was learning, the swarm was learning. His presence, his weapon, his song of defiance, it was being weighed, measured, counted. The priest saw the same shadow in different form. "The angel leads us," he cried above the din, raising his relic high. "Follow him, for the emperor." The refugees seized weapons scavenged from the dead, rusted blades, broken rifles, even stones, and rushed forward behind Legolas. Their cries rose in ragged chorus, courage born of desperation and borrowed faith. For the first time since his arrival, Legolas felt the stir of something within himself. It was not pride, nor vanity, but recognition. These mortals, fragile as reeds in the wind, had chosen to stand. And he could not let their song end here. The hive tyrant roared, and the swarm roared with it. Above, the shadow of the bioships grew darker, their immense forms blotting out the last light of the sun. The true swarm had not yet descended in full, but the world was already drowning in its shadow. Legolas' hand tightened on his bow. His eyes, bright as the stars of forgotten skies, fixed upon the tyrant. This was no skirmish. This was only the beginning. The first shadow of annihilation had fallen. The ruins trembled with the thunder of guns. From the shattered avenues to the west came disciplined fire, not the ragged blasts of starving survivors, but volleys in precise cadence. Red beams lanced through the haze, followed by the deeper, thunderous bark of heavier weapons. Legolas turned his head and saw them. Soldiers in ranks, armored in flak and steel, their banners scorched, their faces grim. The Astra Militarum had come. Their lines advanced through the rubble, bayonets fixed, tanks growling like iron beasts at their flanks. Chimera transports rattled across broken stone, multi-lasers spitting into the advancing swarm. Heavy bolters thundered, each round exploding like a miniature storm. The air filled with a metallic tang of promethium and the stink of burned flesh. For a heartbeat, the swarm faltered beneath this steel wall. Tyranid gaunts shrieked as bolter rounds tore them apart, ichor splattering the ruins. Warriors toppled, their armored carapaces shattered by tank shells. The plain became a slaughterhouse. Legolas moved without hesitation. He darted across the rubble toward the soldiers, his cloak whipping in the ash-choked wind, arrows loosed in perfect rhythm. Each shaft found a target, a beast scaling the flanks of a lemon rust tank, a gaunt darting through the smoke toward a gunner, a warrior whose talons reached for a wounded soldier. Where his arrows flew, men lived. The guardsmen saw him and gasped. Some faltered, thinking him apparition. But when they witnessed the precision of his strikes, their disbelief gave way to grim awe. One sergeant, his voice hoarse from command, spat into the dirt and barked to his men. A stand with the angel. Fire! Damn you, fire! The line held. Legolas found himself shoulder to shoulder with mortals in uniforms he could not name. Their lasguns spat beams of crimson that seared flesh but often failed to fell the larger beasts. He, by contrast, placed each shot where it mattered. His arrows pierced eyes, slipped between armored joints, and even when beasts adapted, he shifted with them, his hunter's instinct guiding his aim with uncanny foresight. A massive carnifex thundered forward, its bulk dwarfing the tanks. Its claws could shear steel, its maw drip venom enough to corrode stone. It smashed through the wreck of a hablock, roaring its challenge, and the line wavered. "Emperor, preserve us!" One guardsman gasped. Legolas leapt. His boots found purchase on a fallen column, and from there he bounded onto the carnifex's back, nimble as a cat. The beast thrashed, chitin plates grinding against his boots, but he did not falter. He loosed 3 arrows in quick succession, each driving deep into the ridges of its neck. The carnifex shrieked, staggering. With a final arrow driven through the roof of its skull, it collapsed into the dust, its body shuddering before going still. The soldiers erupted in cheers, their courage rekindled. For a moment it seemed the tide might be held. But the hive tyrant had not yet joined the battle. It watched, its vast wings unfurling as it surveyed the defense. Through it, the swarm shifted, adapting. Gaunts began to move in flanking arcs, using wreckage as cover. Rippers poured from fresh pods, gnawing at fallen men. Lictors stalked unseen through the shadows, their camouflaged hides bending the light. The sergeant cursed as his vox crackled with garbled commands. "Hold fast, reinforcements inbound." "Emperor willing, we'll bleed them here." Legolas' keen ears caught a new sound, the grinding tread of more tanks. He looked westward and saw them, fresh ranks of armor rolling into the ruins, their guns already blazing. Basilisks launched shells that arced high before descending in thunderous blasts, tearing swathes through the swarm. The earth shook beneath each detonation. Smoke and flame rolled across the battlefield. For every beast torn apart, 10 more pressed forward, but the fury of mankind's arsenal gave pause even to the endless tide. Legolas loosed arrow after arrow, his quiver never seeming to empty. He moved with tireless grace, his eyes narrowing as the battle became more frenzied. In this maelstrom he felt something stir in him long buried, a memory of Helm's Deep, of Pelennor fields, of standing beside Aragorn and Gimli against hosts uncountable. Yet here the despair was deeper, the stakes immeasurably higher. A chimera shuddered and split apart as a Tyranid warrior speared its hull, fire consuming the soldiers inside. Legolas turned, loosing an arrow that pierced the beast's throat as it roared in triumph. The men nearby dragged their wounded clear, shouting their thanks with voices raw from smoke. Still the swarm pressed on. The hive tyrant shrieked again, and the swarm answered with renewed ferocity. Legolas felt the weight of its will pressing upon him, singling him out. He was not merely another defender. To the hive mind he was prey unlike any other, strange, bright, singing with defiance in a world of despair. It would not allow him to endure. He loosed another arrow into the horde. The sergeant beside him slammed another charge pack into his lasgun, shouting over the roar of bolters. "Angel or no, keep firing. They'll drown us if we falter." And for a fleeting instant, Legolas smiled. Here were men who knew the song of battle, who stood against an enemy vast beyond reckoning with nothing but courage and duty. They were not Eldar, not elves, not his kin, but they were warriors, and he would not fail them. The Tyranids surged again, closer, thicker, unrelenting. The defenders' line bent, cracked, threatened to break. The hive tyrant took its first stride toward the battle, wings unfolding like a storm. Legolas' bowstring sang once more. The nightmarish hymn of the swarm roared in answer. The baptism of fire had only begun. When dawn came, it was not with light but with smoke. The ruins of the frontier world smoldered, their skies thick with ash. The Tyranid swarm had been pushed back, if only for a time, by the steel wall of the Astra Militarum. Yet the victory was thin and brittle. The plain was carpeted with corpses, both man and beast, and the horizon still seethed with the endless tide awaiting its next command. Legolas stood apart from the soldiers, his bow resting at his side. He gazed eastward toward the shadowed plain where the hive tyrant still lingered. Though the beast had not pressed its assault, he could feel it watching, calculating. The silence of its restraint was more dreadful than the clamor of its fury. Behind him, the Imperials gathered their wounded. Field medics moved among the dead, marking those beyond saving, tending to those clinging to life. The priests of the ecclesiarchy moved with them, swinging censers that sputtered smoke into the air, chanting prayers over each corpse as if words could keep their souls from the maw of the warp. And then came new figures. From the west rumbled machines that were neither tank nor transport, but great walkers of steel, spider-limbed and crowned with arrays of clicking sensors. They hissed steam as they advanced, flanked by robed attendants whose faces were hidden beneath bronze masks and augmetic eyes. The soldiers parted as these newcomers approached, murmuring uneasily. Legolas turned and saw them clearly. Tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus. They moved with mechanical precision, their robes fluttering like wings of rusted parchment. Tubes pulsed with ichor where flesh had been replaced. Their voices issued not from lips but from vox grills, distorted and metallic. One strode ahead of the others, his form taller, heavier, festooned with mechitendrils tipped with claws, blades, and syringes. His red robes dragged through the ash as though consecrating it. He stopped before Legolas. The machine eyes focused on him, clicking, whirring, dissecting every detail. Uncatalogued xenos, the priest's vox speech rasped, layered with static. Anomaly, form, humanoid. Features, anomalous symmetry, auric pigmentation, ocular luminescence. Weapon, unmechanical yet effective. Probability of mythic origin, within acceptable deviation. Probability of acid viability, significant. Legolas said nothing. The priest's presence stirred unease in him deeper than the swarm's hunger. This figure did not reek of despair, but of cold dissection. He knew the gaze of predators. This was different. This was the gaze of one who would unmake him, not to feed, but to study. The ecclesiarch priest who had proclaimed him angel hurried forward, voice indignant. "You will not touch him. He is heaven sent, a sign of the emperor's favor." The tech priest did not turn his head, but several mechitendrils hissed outward as if tasting the air. A correction. Angelic designation unfounded. Biologic analysis required. Emperor's will is manifest through knowledge. Knowledge requires disassembly. The crowd of refugees gasped in horror. Some clutched at their relics. The guardsmen shifted uneasily, fingers tightening on their weapons, though none dared raise them against the Mechanicus. Legolas' hand drifted toward his bow, not in threat, but in readiness. He met the blank gaze of the machine priest and spoke at last, his voice calm, steady, though his words carried no meaning to them. "I am no one's specimen." The tech priest tilted his head, as if the cadence of the voice itself were another equation to catalogue. Evocal pattern, harmonic. Linguistic anomaly, probability of comprehension. He stopped. The ground trembled. All eyes turned eastward. The hive tyrant shrieked again, a psychic scream that echoed across the plain. The swarm surged anew, thousands of bodies shifting as one tide. The reprieve had ended. The sergeant of the guard barked orders, soldiers rushing to man their barricades, tanks growling back into position. The priests raised their voices in litany. The Mechanicus turned, mechitendrils flaring as their machines clambered into firing positions. But the tech priest lingered one heartbeat longer, his gaze fixed on Legolas. "You will be observed. Data is the Emperor's scripture. The Omnissiah demands." Then he turned, vox clicks barking commands to the war machines at his side. Legolas exhaled, tension leaving his shoulders. Yet unease remained, coiled within. He had faced beasts of shadow and hunger, and their nature was plain. But these men, half machine, half flesh, were veiled in a strangeness he could not name. Their faith was not in gods of light or forests, but in iron and wires, in the worship of knowledge without mercy, and their eyes were fixed on him as much as upon the swarm. The swarm howled. Bolters roared again, tanks firing into the mass. Plasma crackled, lasguns spat red fire, artillery thundered in the distance. The world became a storm of smoke and blood. Legolas raised his bow, loosing arrow after arrow. Beside him, men of the Astra Militarum fired until their barrels glowed, priests shrieked prayers, and the mechanical hymns of the tech priests echoed above it all. And through the chaos, the hive tyrant advanced. Its eyes never left him. Legolas felt the weight of two gazes upon him now, the hunger of the swarm and the scrutiny of the Mechanicus. Between them he stood as hunter and prey, angel and anomaly. And he knew, one wished to consume him, the other wished to claim him. Neither would let him go. The battle raged for hours, but the hours were meaningless. To the swarm, time was nothing but the rhythm of hunger. To the defenders, every heartbeat was an eternity spent between survival and annihilation. Legolas loosed arrow after arrow, his movements fluid, untiring, guided by instincts honed over centuries. Each shaft struck true, eyes, throats, the soft seams between carapace and limb. Where he moved, the line held longer than it should have. Where he stood, men found courage, their fear lessened by his presence. But in the depths of the warp, something stirred. At first, Legolas felt it only faintly, a pressure in his mind like the weight of a storm gathering on the horizon. The shadows of the void he had passed through whispered again, but now their voices were joined by something vaster, older, incomprehensible. The hive mind had noticed him. It was not a thought, not a voice, not even a shape. It was hunger given form, spread across countless bodies, yet singular, unified. It regarded him as a hunter might regard a deer that had inexplicably turned to fight, not with contempt but with curiosity. The sensation made him stagger for the first time since he had arrived in this world. His bowstring wavered. Images crashed through his mind, forests twisted into flesh, rivers replaced by veins, skies thick with wings that blotted out stars. He saw worlds swallowed whole, their cities reduced to bone and ichor, their people consumed until only silence remained. He felt the psychic scream of millions of voices extinguished at once, devoured not for malice, not for vengeance, but for sustenance. The hive mind showed him this not as warning, but as inevitability. Legolas' breath quickened. For a heartbeat he smelled not the ash of the battlefield, but the green scent of Mirkwood, his father's halls lit by torchlight, Aragorn's voice calling him by the campfire. Then those memories blackened, twisted, drowned beneath waves of chittering jaws. The hive mind was reaching into his soul, unmaking him by showing what it would do to all he loved. He closed his eyes, his hand tightened on his bow, and he whispered, not to the hive, not to the hive, not to the men around him, but to himself. I will not sing your song. The alien pressure pressed harder. The swarm moved in strange concert, their strikes shifting as though guided not by instinct, but by the hive's direct will. Creatures turned their eyes from the guardsman to him, abandoning closer prey to rush where he stood. Every arrow he loosed drew more attention. Every defiance sharpened the focus of the great hunger upon him. The soldiers noticed. They're going for him. One shouted. The sergeant barked orders, dragging squads to cover Legolas' flanks. Men died faster for it, yet they held unwilling to let their strange angel fall. And still the hive mind pressed. It was no longer content to show him visions. It whispered in echoes of his companions long gone. Aragorn's voice promised him strength eternal if he bent his will. Gimli's laugh urged him to strike without end. Even his father's stern tone told him that to resist was to doom those around him. The voices were hollow, filled with a resonance that was not theirs, but they clawed at him all the same. Legolas bit back the pressure with silence. He fought not only with bow and arrow, but with the memory of who he was. His people's songs, their light, their sorrow, he held to them like a shield. He would not let this hunger define him, but he could feel it adapting. Already his arrows that once struck through carapace now glanced away. The swarm shifted its armor, its reflexes, its very flesh reshaping to resist him. Each strike taught them more of him. Each act of defiance made them stronger. The tech priests saw it too. From behind their machines they chanted binary canticles, recording his every movement, their lenses drinking in the battle. The Xenos alters the algorithmic probability, one rasp to another. A note the swarm's adaptation. His presence creates new variables. To them he was not angel or savior, but experiment. To the hive he was prey of unique flavor, worthy of its direct attention. And to the soldiers at his side he was the line between hope and despair. The hive tyrant advanced once more, its wings spreading as though to blot out the heavens themselves. The pressure in Legolas' mind sharpened, no longer vague but focused, the full will of the hive mind pressing down upon him like the weight of a mountain. He stumbled. The world seemed to blur, the battlefield fading into a forest twisted and alien, its trees dripping ichor, its sky a lattice of bone. He smelled sap turned sour, earth churned into flesh. The hive mind was showing him a vision of a world remade, a glimpse of what this place would become once its hunger was sated. The priest cried out behind him, mistaking his falter. "A stand, angel! Do not let the shadow break you. Ha! Legolas forced his eyes open. The ash returned, the ruins, the smoke, the endless tide. He felt the weight of the hive mind still pressing on him, but he lifted his bow regardless. His voice was steady, though his heart strained against the pressure. You will not have me. The tyrant shrieked, a psychic answer that rattled every stone in the ruins. The swarm surged forward once more, and Legolas, standing with bow raised, loosed another arrow into the tide. The hive mind's gaze had settled upon him, and it would not turn away. The Basilica Dominatus rose like a blackened tooth from the carcass of the city. Once it had been the pride of this frontier world, a towering cathedral fortress where the songs of the faithful echoed against pillars of marble and stained glass. Now its spires were cracked, its saints defaced by fire, and its bells shattered into silence. Yet it remained the last bastion, its walls thick with faith and stone alike, a citadel in which the survivors gathered for what might be their final stand. Legolas stood upon the ramparts, the ash wind whipping his hair, his bow steady in his hands. Below, the plaza seethed with desperate activity. Guardsmen erected barricades from broken statues and scorched tanks. Priests scrawled prayers in blood across the walls, their litanies rising in fervent rhythm. Even the civilians, gaunt and hollow-eyed, carried rubble and sharpened metal, transforming ruin into bulwark. The ecclesiarch priest who had first hailed him as angel raised his voice before the gathered masses. Brothers, sisters, the devourer comes to feast upon your flesh, but the emperor does not abandon his children. Behold, he sends us his servant, radiant and swift, a sign that the throne watches still. The crowd roared in fractured devotion. Eyes turned to Legolas where he stood on the wall, and for a moment he felt the weight of their faith pressing upon him. He did not raise his arms nor speak. He only nocked an arrow and kept his gaze eastward. To him that was enough. The horizon stirred. The Tyranids came in silence first, shadows shifting in the smoke. Then the sound rose, the endless chittering, the clicking of claws against stone, the guttural shrieks of hunger. From the ruins of the plain they surged, wave after wave of flesh and claw, their numbers blotting out the land. At their center strode the hive tyrant, wings outstretched like a blasphemous archangel, its crown of spines glistening with ichor. The ground shook with their advance. "A guns! A guns!" The sergeant bellowed from the wall. "All guns! Fire!" The basilica erupted with light and thunder. Heavy bolters spat streams of explosive rounds, tearing swathes through the front ranks of gaunts. Las cannons flashed, vaporizing warriors in lances of incandescent fire. Mortars rained shells upon the tide, bursting them into fountains of ichor and chitin. The first wave of creatures shattered beneath the barrage, but the second climbed over their corpses, and the third, and the fourth. Legolas loosed arrow after arrow, each shot precise, each strike felling a beast that threatened to scale the walls. He moved as if he were part of the wind itself, flowing from one battlement to another, his bowstring singing without pause. Where he aimed, defenders lived. A spore chimed as it struck the courtyard, bursting into a cloud of toxins. Soldiers gagged, some collapsing as their lungs dissolved. From the pod spilled creatures with scything talons, shrieking as they tore into the nearest men. Legolas leapt from the rampart, landing lightly in the chaos. His arrows whispered death through the thick mist, striking each beast in turn. His final shot pierced the heart of the spore's bloated carcass, igniting it into flame. The men cheered, though their voices cracked with smoke, yet the swarm pressed harder. The hive tyrant lifted its claw and shrieked, and the swarm obeyed. Great beasts lumbered forward, hurling living projectiles that splattered against the basilica's walls, gnawing acid into the stone. Warriors with biocannons vomited streams of organic fire into the defenders, tearing gaps in the line. Legolas scaled the stairs once more, his breath steady though his muscles strained. He had known great battles in his world, but none such as this, where each slain foe was replaced by 10 more, where every arrow loosed was swallowed by the tide, and yet he did not yield. The priests raised their litanies louder, their voices desperate, shrill, almost breaking. In the Emperor's name, in the name of terror, in the name of the throne eternal, a guardsman at Legolas' side fell, a talon piercing his chest. Without pause, Legolas seized the man's falling lasgun and fired it into the beast's skull, dropping it instantly. He handed the weapon to another soldier before returning to his bow. The sergeant roared over the din. "Hold the line! Hold it, damn you, or the basilica falls!" Legolas loosed again, his arrow piercing a warrior's throat. For every one slain, another climbed the walls. His heart told him the truth. The swarm was endless. The defenders could bleed them, could make them suffer, but they could not stop them, not forever. And then the ground split. A monstrous creature, larger than any yet seen, erupted from beneath the basilica itself. A Marlock, its body serpentine, its maw lined with rings of teeth. It shrieked, shaking the very foundations of the fortress. Dozens of men were swallowed in an instant, their screams cut short. The walls trembled, stones cracking. The defenders faltered. Legolas did not think. He sprang onto the Marlock's ridged back, climbing as it thrashed. His bow sang arrow after arrow, piercing its eyes, its gills, the soft flesh beneath its armored plates. The beast writhed, slamming into pillars, crushing stone beneath its bulk. Finally, with a roar, it collapsed into the courtyard, its ichor flooding the stones. For a heartbeat, silence fell. Then the swarm shrieked as one, louder than thunder, and surged again. The hive tyrant spread its wings, the shadow of its bulk falling upon the basilica. Legolas stood atop the carcass of the Marlock, his bow lifted. His body was weary, his spirit pressed by the endless hunger, but his eyes remained clear. The basilica walls groaned beneath the assault. The defenders cried out in fear and fury. The sky rained spores and ash, and as the hive tyrant's shadow eclipsed him, Legolas whispered, "What be it?" The siege had only begun. The basilica trembled beneath the endless tide. Screams mingled with the thunder of bolters, the shriek of Catin rending stone. Ash fell like black snow, choking the lungs of those who yet lived. Legolas loosed arrow after arrow until the bowstring itself seemed part of his heartbeat. Yet even as his arm did not falter, something colder pressed against his mind. The hive tyrant stood amidst the swarm, its vast wings unfurled, its crown of spines glowing with psychic light, its eyes locked upon him. In that gaze, Legolas felt the pressure surge. It was no longer distant. It was inside him. The battlefield blurred. The cries of the soldiers fell away. The basilica's ramparts dissolved into shadow. His bow wavered in his hand, its shape bending, melting, until it was no more than a ghost. And he stood in a forest. At first glance it was Mirkwood, the deep green of his youth. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappled upon the moss at his feet. He smelled earth, damp and alive, rich with memory. A bird sang above, its voice sweet and clear. For a heartbeat his heart ached with longing. He had not seen such a sight since the world before. But then he looked closer. The trees pulsed faintly, their bark breathing as if with veins beneath. The moss was slick with a sheen too bright, too wet. The bird sang again, but when it turned its head, its beak opened to reveal not feathers but rows of chittering mandibles. Legolas' breath caught. He stepped back, but the ground yielded like flesh. His boots sank into it and the soil quivered as if in pain. The hive mind whispered, it spoke without words, a chorus that filled the forest. Hunter, archer, prey, sing for us, bend to us. We devour all songs, all light, all worlds. You are nothing but meat for the endless hunger. The trees shifted, their branches weaving together into the shapes of faces he knew. Aragorn emerged, tall and noble, though his eyes were hollow black pits. Gimli's laughter echoed, but his mouth split wider and wider until it was all teeth. Even his father's stern gaze appeared in the wood, though the crown of Thranduil dripped with ichor, and the elven king's hand stretched out skeletal and clawed. Legolas, the false Aragorn, spoke, its voice like dry leaves. Why do you fight? You cannot win. The tide cannot be stemmed. Your arrows fall, and still the swarm rises. Join us. Become one. Be devoured and end the struggle. He raised his bow, but in this dream forest, no arrow came to his hand. His quiver was empty. His weapon useless. The hive mind pressed deeper, and the forest shifted again. Now it was not Mirkwood, but Lothlorien. Golden leaves turned black, the silver waters stagnant with slime. The voice of Galadriel echoed faintly, twisted, promising power if only he surrendered. Around him elves stood, but their fair faces warped into Tyranid maws, their song twisted into hissing hunger. Legolas shut his eyes. He pressed his hands to his ears, but the voices seeped through his very bones. The hive was trying to unmake him, to drown him in despair. He whispered to himself in the tongue of his people words older than this war, older than this galaxy. I am the son of the greenwood. My song is my own. The forest trembled, shuddering as though the words themselves struck at its roots. The hive mind hissed in fury. The trees bent, collapsing inward, their branches writhing into claws. The ground split open, revealing not soil but the endless, screaming faces of those consumed. They shrieked in agony, calling his name, pleading for him to join them, to end the torment by surrendering. Legolas staggered, the weight of their voices crushing him. He fell to his knees, his breath ragged, his heart pounding as if to break, his hands pressed against his skull, desperate to keep the swarm out. Then he heard another sound. Not a scream, not a hiss, but the faint memory of a horn. It was the horn of Helm's, deep, distant and faint, yet echoing in his soul. It was Aragorn's battle cry, Gimli's roar, the thunder of Rohan's riders. It was the sound of fellowship, of standing together against shadow. He rose, slowly, trembling, but he rose, and as he stood his bow returned to his hand. An arrow gleamed in his grasp, its fletching shining as though woven from starlight itself. The hive mind shrieked, "No, you are ours, you will be consumed." Legolas drew the arrow back, his eyes steady. "Not while I stand," he loosed. The dream forest split apart. The arrow streaked through the illusion, piercing the fabric of the hive's deceit. The trees shattered into smoke, the faces melted into ash, the false voices silenced, and he awoke. The basilica roared around him once more. The screams, the bolt of fire, the thunder of the swarm. He stood upon the rampart, his bow still raised, his arrow buried in the skull of a Tyranid warrior scaling the wall. His chest heaved, sweat mingling with ash upon his brow. But his eyes were clear. He had faced the hive mind's dream and broken it. Yet as the tyrant shrieked from the plain, he knew this was no victory. It had seen him, it had tested him, and it would not stop until either he was broken or consumed. Consumed. The hive had looked into his soul, and it would never forget him. The basilica's stones groaned beneath the endless tide. Smoke swirled through the shattered spires, mingling with the incense of desperate prayer. Men screamed, bolters roared, and still Legolas loosed his arrows without pause, each one finding its mark. Yet even as he fought, the press of the hive tyrant's gaze lingered at the edge of his mind, an unbroken reminder that the swarm had fixed upon him. Then above the roar of battle, a new sound cut through the chaos, the grinding hiss of engines, the shriek of descent thrusters, the harsh cry of vox amplifiers. From the smoke, armored transports rumbled into the ruined plaza, their hulls marked not with the emblems of the Guard, but with the sigil of the Inquisition, a stylized letter or eye crowned with a skull. The soldiers of the Astra Militarum fell back in awe and fear alike. Priests faltered in their litanies. Even the tech priests lowered their augmetic heads. All knew what it meant when the Inquisition came. The first to emerge was clad in power armor black as midnight, its surface engraved with prayers of fire. A cloak of crimson trailed behind him, scorched at the edges, yet still flowing like blood in the wind. His face was pale, drawn tight by years of war and judgment, his eyes like chips of obsidian. In his gauntleted hands he carried a bolter worked in gold and silver, its muzzle already smoking with fresh use, an inquisitor. He strode forward without hesitation, his vox-amplified voice cutting through the battlefield. "This world is dying, and I will see it judged before it burns." The survivors dropped to their knees. Even the sergeant who had barked orders with iron lungs bowed his head. Only Legolas remained standing, bow still in hand, his gaze steady upon the man. The Inquisitor's black eyes fixed on him. For a long moment silence reigned, broken only by the shrieks of Tyranids battering the walls. "This," the Inquisitor said at last, pointing, "is no angel." The crowd gasped. The ecclesiarch priest clutched his relic tighter, his voice shrill. "A blasphemy. You see with mortal eyes what is divine. You see with mortal eyes what is divine. He is the Emperor's sign sent to us in our hour of need." The Inquisitor's gaze did not waver. "He is Xenos. I smell it on him. Alien craft, alien flesh, alien soul. You would crown him saint, yet he is no servant of the throne. He is danger made flesh." Murmurs rippled through the refugees. Some looked at Legolas with doubt, others with desperation. A few began to tremble, torn between faith and fear. Legolas said nothing. His bow was lowered but not dismissed, his eyes calm though the weight of their judgment pressed upon him. He understood none of their words, yet he read their faces well enough. The man in black was their judge, and his own life hung by threads of belief. The priest fell to his knees before the Inquisitor, his voice desperate. "Without him we would be ash. Did you not see? He struck the beasts as no mortal could. The hive faltered before his bow. He is no threat. He is deliverance." The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed. "Hope blinds you, priest. How many times have I seen men hail the alien as savior, only to find themselves enslaved by it? Faith must be tested. If he is of the Emperor's will, he will endure the flame. If not—" He raised his bolter, the muzzle glowing faintly red. "He will burn." The soldiers stirred uneasily. Some gripped their weapons tighter, torn between obedience and the awe that Legolas inspired. The tech priests whispered in binary, their mechanical voices rasping equations of probability and risk. Legolas understood enough. The man before him would decide his fate not by his deeds, but by suspicion. And yet he did not reach for an arrow. He simply raised his chin, his voice quiet, spoken in the tongue of his people. "If I must be tested, then so be it. But I will not bow to fear." The words were meaningless to those who heard them, but his tone was not. Even the Inquisitor paused, his eyes narrowing further as though measuring the strength behind the alien's calm. Before he could speak again, the Hive Tyrant shrieked. The walls of the basilica shuddered as the swarm surged, its next wave battering the defenses with renewed ferocity. Gaunts poured over the barricades, clawing at defenders with talons slick with Ikea. Warriors spat streams of bioplasma that scorched stone and flesh alike. Above it all, the tyrant loomed, directing its brood with gestures like a conductor commanding an orchestra of horror. The sergeant roared for his men to fire. The priests raised their litanies once more, desperate and shrill, and Legolas loosed an arrow. It struck a warrior climbing the wall, piercing its skull before it could eviscerate the wounded at its feet. Then another, and another, and another. He moved with the same fluid grace as before, his bow singing above the chaos, each shot saving another life. The people saw it. Their voices rose again, crying his name, calling him angel, deliverer, salvation. Their faith in him burned brighter, even against the Inquisitor's condemnation. The man in black lowered his bolter slightly, his gaze unreadable. He did not renounce his suspicion, but neither did he fire. Instead, he spoke with cold finality. "This world teeters between salvation and damnation. If you are what they believe, alien, you will prove it in battle. But know this. When the Tyranids are broken, my judgment will fall upon you, and the Emperor's flame spares no heretic." Legolas did not answer. He simply drew another arrow, loosed it into the tide, and whispered under his breath, "Then let the battle decide." The Inquisitor turned away, cloak billowing, and raised his vox. Orders crackled, cold and precise. Around him, squads of stormtroopers disembarked, their hellguns blazing into the swarm. The basilica shook again as the swarm struck harder, the Hive Tyrant raising its wings for the next assault. And above the thunder of guns, the fragile bonds of faith held for now. The night was heavy with ash. The fires of the basilica burned low, their smoke rising like funeral pyres into the crimson sky. The Tyranids had withdrawn for the moment, leaving only their carcasses heaped against the walls, the stench of ichor choking the air. Men whispered that it was not retreat but calculation, that the hive mind was waiting, reshaping, preparing for its next strike. Legolas stood alone in the shadow of the cathedral spire, his bow resting across his lap. His eyes, keen as ever, turned not to the horizon but to the weapons at his side. He knew the truth that no prayer nor sermon could banish. His arrows struck swift, his aim flawless, yet the swarm learned. Coin. Already, carapaces thickened, joints hardened, reflexes sharpened. Soon even his skill would be answered with futility. If he was to strike down the tyrant, the will of this endless tide, he would need more than speed or precision. He would need an arrow that could pierce not only flesh but fate itself. The tech priests had noticed his solitude. Their machine eyes whirred as they watched from afar, recording every breath. Yet when one of them dared approach, mechadendrites clicking, Legolas raised a hand. "Leave me." The words meant nothing to them, but his tone carried weight enough that the priest withdrew. Only the ecclesiarch priest remained, his face gaunt, his eyes burning with fanatical light. "Do you prepare a miracle, angel? The Emperor guides your hand, I see it. His will flows through you." Legolas shook his head slowly, though his voice was gentle. "And not the will of your Emperor, only my own." The priest did not understand, but he bowed and stepped back, muttering prayers all the same. Legolas drew from his quiver the arrow that had carried him through the void. The first arrow, the one untouched by this war, its shaft still gleaming faintly with a light that no soot could dull. He studied it for a long moment. It had been forged for no such battle as this, yet it had endured where all else faltered. But it alone would not suffice. His eyes turned to the ruin of the battlefield. Among the shattered husks of Tyranid warriors lay fragments of chitin harder than any stone, ichor that burned like acid, spines that gleamed like obsidian. And among the wreckage of the basilica itself were relics of this imperium, shards of adamantine statues, splinters of wraithbone relics once hidden in the reliquary, metals that hummed faintly with psychic residue. Legolas set to work. He broke the arrow apart, stripping it down to its barest shaft. With patient hands he bound to it slivers of Tyranid chitin, their edges honed by battle. He reforged the head with adamantine, hammered flat upon a shard of broken stone, then sharpened it with fragments of crystal scavenged from the reliquary. Each piece bound together not by craft alone, but by his song. He hummed softly in the elven tongue, an ancient hymn of the woods, a melody of dawnlight and the silence between stars. The soldiers who watched from afar fell silent. They had seen priests bless weapons, tech priests anoint machines with sacred oils, but never had they seen such artistry, such quiet purpose. The arrow gleamed faintly, light pulsing from within as though the materials themselves remembered the touch of the song. Hours passed, but time meant nothing. When he finished, the arrow lay before him like a shard of eternity. Its shaft was pale as bone, its head glimmered with metallic fire, its fletching shimmered with starlight. It was no longer mere weapon, it was a promise. The ecclesiarch priest fell to his knees. "The emperor has given you his spear," he whispered. "With this you shall slay the great beast." Legolas said nothing. He only lifted the arrow, feeling its weight, its balance. It thrummed faintly in his fingers as if it yearned to fly. But he knew what it meant. This arrow was not meant for gaunts or warriors, nor even for the countless spawn that swarmed the battlefield. This was for the tyrant, for the will that bound the swarm, one shot, one chance. The Inquisitor came then, his black armor still scorched with ash, his eyes sharp as razors. He regarded the arrow in Legolas' hand with suspicion, perhaps even unease. "You craft weapons of sorcery. You consort with relics and alien matter. Do you not see, priest?" He turned to the ecclesiarch. "This is heresy incarnate." The ecclesiarch's voice rose in fury. "Heresy! Look upon the works of heaven. Would you deny the emperor's miracle?" The Inquisitor's hand hovered over his bolter, his eyes fixed on Legolas. "When this ends, alien, if the beast falls, you will answer, sir. But until then," his voice trailed, cold and sharp, "until then I will see if your arrow can do what faith alone cannot." Legolas met his gaze calmly, then turned back to the weapon in his hands. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "If this arrow will fly true, of that I swear." The ground trembled. From the east came the first rumble of the next assault. The walls of the basilica shook. The swarm had returned, greater than before. Above them, the sky was blotted out by the shadow of the Hive Fleet, its bioships looming ever closer, their vast forms seeping through the clouds like mountains in motion. The priests screamed their prayers. The soldiers raised their weapons. And Legolas, with the arrow of the infinite in his hand, climbed the spire of the basilica to await the tyrant's approach. The sky cracked open. It was not thunder that split the heavens, nor the storm of any natural world. It was the descent of Leviathan's living ships so vast they blotted out the stars. Their carapaces glistened with slime and ichor, their membranes pulsed with veins that carried oceans of alien blood. They moved with a dreadful silence, gliding like predators above the battlefield, and their shadow fell across the basilica like a funeral shroud. Every man, woman, and child within the fortress felt the weight of that shadow. Some cried out, others clutched their relics and whispered frantic prayers. Even the hardened guardsmen faltered, their lasguns trembling in their hands as the sheer enormity of the swarm pressed upon them. Legolas stood atop the spire, the wind whipping his cloak, his eyes fixed on the heavens. He had known the skies of many lands, the clear blue of Gondor, the golden haze of Rohan, the silver twilight of Lothlorien. None had ever seemed so final as this. The very heavens themselves had become a mouth, yawning wide to consume all. From the Leviathans rained death. Great spore pods fell like meteors, their surfaces slick with mucus, their cores glowing with vile life. They struck the earth with detonations that cracked stone, spewing forth tides of smaller beasts. Mycetic spores burst in the air, releasing clouds of toxins that shimmered green against the ash. Capillary towers sprouted wherever the pods landed, burrowing roots into the earth, pumping the planet's lifeblood toward the waiting ships above. The basilica shook beneath the onslaught. "The Emperor save us," whispered a guardsman on the wall, his voice breaking. The Inquisitor's amplified tone thundered in reply. "The Emperor's judgment is not mercy but fire. Stand and burn the Xenos from this world, or die with a curse upon your name." Stormtroopers fired their hellguns, beams of searing light cutting through the first ranks of gaunts. Heavy bolters roared, the staccato rhythm of exploding shells shaking the wall. Mortars belched their payloads into the seething tide, tearing craters into the earth. only for the gaps to be filled instantly with new bodies. Legolas loosed his arrows, each one a silver whisper against the devouring dark. His aim never faltered. A winged gargoyle plummeted in flames, a carnifex roared in pain as an arrow lodged deep in its eye, a warrior collapsed as its synaptic node was pierced. Yet even as his arrows flew, the swarm surged. The hive tyrant advanced at the heart of the tide, its wings spread wide, its crown of spines glowing with psychic malice. Every step it took bent the swarm around it, its will directing thousands as though they were but fingers of its hand. Its gaze fixed upon the spire where Legolas stood, and the elf felt once more the crushing weight of its attention. The hive mind screamed in his skull, "You are nothing. Your arrows break, your bones will crack, your song will end in silence." Legolas' hand tightened on the arrow of the infinite. He did not yet raise it. Not yet. To release it too soon was to fail. He steadied his breath. His eyes narrowed against the wind. Below, the basilica's defenders were faltering. Tyranids scaled the walls, their talons rending stone. Gaunts swarmed through the breaches, ripping men apart with snapping jaws. A Mawloc burst from beneath the courtyard, its serpentine body scattering defenders like leaves in a storm. Priests screamed their litanies until their throats bled, but even their voices cracked beneath the endless roar of the swarm. The sergeant fought with bayonet and lasgun, his men dying one after another beside him. "Hold the line," he bellowed, though his own voice shook with despair. "Who for the throne? For the Emperor?" Legolas leapt down from the spire, landing amidst the chaos. His bow sang, every arrow loosed with impossible precision, every strike felling a beast that threatened to breach the heart of the fortress. Soldiers rallied to him, their courage reignited for as long as his presence stood among them. To them he was no longer an angel, nor a heretic. He was survival itself. Yet the sky kept raining death. A spore the size of a house split open before the basilica's gates, disgorging a monstrous Tyrannofex. Its biocannon hissed, spewing streams of corrosive fire that melted stone and flesh alike. Guardsmen screamed as their bodies dissolved, their weapons clattering to the ground. Legolas drew the arrow of the infinite, his hand steady, his breath calm. But as he raised it, the hive tyrant shrieked, its psychic will crashing down like a hammer. His vision blurred, the battlefield twisting into nightmare. For a moment he saw not the Tyranid tide, but his own world drowned in ichor, the forests blackened, his kin devoured. He nearly faltered, nearly loosed too soon. Then a voice rose, a mortal's ragged yet defiant. The priest, his relic held high, cried out with what breath he had left. "Stand, angel, for stand, angel. Show the Xenos the light of heaven." Legolas steadied. He lowered the arrow once more, saving it for the tyrant. For the will, not the brood, the Tyrannofex turned its cannon toward him. Its maw glowed with corrosive flame. Legolas leapt aside as the blast struck, the stone where he had stood melting into slag. He rolled to his feet, loosed 3 arrows in swift succession. 2 shattered against the beast's carapace, but the third pierced the soft tissue beneath its jaw. The monster shrieked and toppled, crashing into the ruins. The soldiers roared in triumph, though the sound was swallowed instantly by the next wave of chittering horrors. Above it all, the high fleet pressed closer, its shadow covering the sky. The basilica was drowned in living night, and all who stood within it knew the truth. The world itself was being devoured. Legolas raised his bow again, his eyes fixed on the tyrant. The moment was coming. One shot, one chance. One chance. The basilica shook as the swarm crashed against its walls in a storm of flesh and claw. The defenders screamed, bolters thundered, lasguns burned red through the smoke. But amidst the chaos, all eyes turned to one figure descending upon the battlefield. The hive tyrant spread its wings wide, blotting out the last flicker of sun. Its carapace gleamed with psychic light, its talons dripped venom that hissed when it struck stone. In its massive hands it bore living weapons that writhed and shrieked, pulsing with vile energy. It was not merely a beast, it was command will, hunger incarnate, and its gaze was fixed on Legolas. The elf prince stood upon the basilica wall, the arrow of the infinite clenched in his hand, his bow strung and ready. The swarm parted as the tyrant advanced, its massive frame towering above the battlefield, its shriek rattling the very marrow of those who heard it. The Inquisitor raised his bolter, his voice a cold snarl. "This is it. Strike alien or die with them all." Legolas leapt from the wall. He landed upon the broken stones of the courtyard, ash rising around him in a storm. His eyes never left the tyrant. His eyes never left the tyrant. His heartbeat slowed steady as if the world itself had narrowed to this moment. Predator against predator. The tyrant struck first. It swept a talon the size of a tree through the air, its force shattering the ruins where Legolas had stood. But the elf was already moving, light as a breath of wind. "Erpib!" He darted aside, rolling between rubble, loosing an arrow as he rose. It struck the tyrant's shoulder joint, piercing flesh, but the beast only shrieked and tore it free, Iha spraying in arcs across the stone. The ground quaked with every step it took, each one shaking the basilica's foundations. It swung again, this time with its living weapon, a biocannon that vomited streams of acid. Legolas vaulted onto a fallen column, springing upward as the acid hissed and boiled where he had been. He loosed 3 arrows in swift succession, each striking the tyrant's crown of spines. 2 shattered against its hardened shell, the third buried shallow, drawing another roar. The soldiers cheered, but their voices were drowned beneath the hive's psychic scream. Legolas staggered as the force of the tyrant's will crashed into his mind, visions flooding his senses. Worlds consumed, forests turned to bone, oceans drunk dry. He saw his father's halls drowning in ichor, Aragorn's face torn apart by mandibles, Gimli's laughter silenced in a maw of teeth. He clenched his jaw, forcing the visions away. His hand tightened around the arrow of the infinite, but he did not release it. Not yet. The tyrant leapt, wings unfurling, and crashed into the courtyard where Legolas stood. The impact shattered stone, throwing men screaming into the air. Its talons swept low, rending through barricades and bodies alike. Legolas darted beneath its reach, his bowstring thrumming as he loosed another volley. His arrows found eyes, joints, the softer membranes of its wings. The tyrant shrieked, but it did not falter. It pressed forward with unrelenting hunger. The duel became a dance. Elf and beast circled one another amidst ruin and fire, each movement met with counter, each strike testing the other. The tyrant's claws struck like lightning, its psychic presence hammering against his mind, seeking to drown him in despair. Legolas answered with grace beyond mortal ken, each arrow a song of defiance, each step a whisper of wind through leaves. The soldiers watched, their battle forgotten as predator met predator in the courtyard. Even the priests fell silent, their prayers caught in their throats. In that moment, the war narrowed to 2 figures, the angel they had named and the monster that commanded the swarm. The tyrant lunged. Its talons crashed down, striking the column Legolas leapt from. Stone exploded, the elf spun through the ash, his cloak torn, his bowstring singing. His arrow struck the tyrant's throat, drawing a roar that split the night, but the beast adapted, its armor thickened, its movements faster, sharper. Already it was learning him, shaping itself to answer his every strike. Legolas' arrows glanced off where once they pierced. The hive mind was watching, altering, evolving. His breath came faster. He felt the weight of inevitability pressing down. The arrow he held, the one he had forged, burned in his grasp, its fletching shimmering faintly with starlight. One chance, one moment, he had to find it. The tyrant raised its biocannon once more. A sphere of crackling venom built in its maw, light dripping like molten glass. The soldiers screamed warnings, but Legolas did not move. He waited, eyes fixed upon the beast, every sense honed to a point. The cannon fired. He leapt into the air. Time seemed to still. Ash hung motionless. The roar of the swarm faded. His body twisted, his bow rising, the arrow of the infinite notched against the string. For a single heartbeat, all was silence. Only him, the arrow, and the predator before him. He loosed. The arrow streaked through the night like a shard of eternity. It cut through smoke and flame, through the shriek of the hive's psychic will, striking the tyrant square between its eyes. The impact shook the world. The arrow drove deeper than any mortal shaft could. Light flared from within the beast's skull, burning through its crown of spines. For a moment, the tyrant screamed not in hunger, but in rage. Pure, endless, psychic rage. Then it fell. The ground quaked as its bulk crashed into the courtyard, stone shattering beneath its weight. The swarm faltered as one, their chittering voices breaking into confusion. The psychic link wavered, the hive's chorus stuttering. The soldiers roared, their voices thunderous, triumphant. The priest fell to his knees, tears streaking his ash-stained face. Even the Inquisitor's cold eyes widened, if only for a moment. Legolas stood amidst the silence, his bow lowered, his breath steady though his chest heaved. The arrow had vanished into the beast's skull, consumed in the act. Only ichor and ruin remained. The hive tyrant was fallen, but above them the sky still writhed with leviathans. The swarm had not ended. The hunger had not died. The victory was real, but it was only a moment bought against eternity. The hive tyrant's corpse lay broken in the courtyard, its wings twisted, its crown of spines shattered by the arrow of the infinite. Ichor seeped across the cracked stones, steaming in the chill air. For the first time since the siege had begun, the swarm faltered. The psychic chorus that had bound them wavered, its rhythm broken. Gaunts froze mid-charge, their heads twitching as though caught in confusion. Warriors shrieked and clawed at their own faces, their synaptic link disrupted. The soldiers of the Astra Militarum seized the moment. Bolters roared, lasguns spat crimson light, mortars thundered. Men who had been drowning in despair now shouted with renewed fury, carving through the staggering tide. "For the Emperor!" they cried. "For the Angel!" For the Angel! Legolas stood amid the ruin, his bow lowered, his breath steady though his heart still thundered. His eyes lifted to the sky, and there the truth burned against him. The hive fleet loomed vast and unbroken, its leviathans blotting out the heavens. Even without the tyrant, the swarm was not ended. The hive mind was greater than any single beast, its will stretching through the galaxy like an ocean that had only just begun to pour into this world. He understood. The arrow he had loosed was not the end, only the opening note of a longer song. If this world was to survive at all, he would have to strike again, not merely the flesh of the tyrant, but the very web of command that bound the swarm together. He turned toward the basilica's spire. Its blackened frame reached skyward like the finger of some colossal corpse, cracked but unbroken. He began to climb. Soldiers and refugees alike watched him ascend, their voices hushed. The priest spread his arms toward the spire, his face aglow with fanatic fire. He climbs to heaven's throne. He will sing the death of the devourer. Even the Inquisitor, his jaw tight, did not call him back. He merely watched, his black eyes unreadable, as the elf rose step by step into the storm. The climb was long, the stones cracked and slick with ash. Yet Legolas moved as one born for it, his hands and feet sure upon each ledge. The wind lashed at him, carrying the stench of Ichor and burning promethium, the cries of men and beasts alike. But higher he climbed, until at last he stood upon the highest parapet, the city stretched beneath him, the hive fleet looming above. There he drew forth his bow once more. His quiver was nearly empty, but it did not matter. He had loosed the arrow of the infinite. And though it had buried itself in the tyrant's skull, its echo still lingered. He could feel it thrumming through his hands, a resonance between his bowstring and the living chorus of the swarm. Closing his eyes, he began to hum. It was the song of his people, older than the white towers, older than the greenwood, a melody of starlight, of dawn, of the first breath of wind upon the waters. It rose from him into the air, weaving with the bowstring, filling the night with a sound that was not of this world. The swarm screamed. The hive mind pressed upon him at once, its fury vast, its hunger enraged. "You cannot break us, we are endless. We are legion, you are one." Legolas opened his eyes and his voice rose louder, his song threading through the ash and smoke. "One may yet sing against the night," he loosed. The arrow streaked upward, not wood nor steel, but song itself. A shaft woven from memory and defiance, from the echo of the infinite arrow that had slain the tyrant. It soared into the sky, its light cutting through the darkness, piercing the synaptic threads that bound the swarm. The effect was instant. The creatures below shrieked, their movements shattering into chaos. Warriors clawed at their own skulls, guns convulsed in frenzy, gargoyles plummeted from the air in spasms of agony. Even the massive carnifexes bellowed, staggering as though blinded. The psychic web rippled with cracks, the hive's command fractured by the note of an alien song it could not consume. The soldiers roared, pressing their advantage, driving the disoriented beasts back from the basilica's walls. For the first time in living memory, the devourer faltered before prey. But the hive mind screamed in reply. The sky itself seemed to split, psychic lightning tearing through the clouds. The leviathans above shuddered, their vast forms glowing with baleful fire. The song had struck them, but it had not destroyed them. The ocean was endless, and he had only thrown a single stone into its depths. Legolas staggered on the spire, his vision swimming as the backlash of the hive's rage struck him. Blood traced from his nose, his breath ragged. The wind howled, nearly casting him into the abyss. Yet he gripped his bow tighter, his voice still carrying the song even as his strength waned. Below, the priest shouted, his hands raised to the heavens. "He sings with the Emperor's voice. See how the swarm trembles." The Inquisitor's face remained hard, his jaw clenched. Yet even he did not raise his weapon, for in that moment there was no denying the truth. The elf had wrought a miracle upon the swarm. The basilica's bells, long broken, gave a single toll, as though answering the song. Legolas drew one final arrow, his last. His hands shook, his vision blurred, but he knocked it to the string. He aimed not at the beasts below, nor the Tyranid leviathans above, but into the void itself, into the unseen heart of the hive's command, and with a voice raw but unbroken he loosed. The arrow vanished into the clouds. The swarm howled in unison, their cries shaking the heavens. The hive fleet itself shuddered, its vast forms recoiling, its roots tearing at the earth in fury. For one heartbeat, the endless hunger faltered. For one heartbeat, silence fell upon the devouring sky. The sky was torn. The last arrow had vanished into the storm. Its light swallowed by clouds, yet the echo of its flight lingered. The swarm convulsed as one. Gaunts collapsed in spasms, warriors shrieked and tore at their own flesh. Gargoyles rained from the heavens like burning meteors. Even the great leviathans above shuddered, their vast forms rippling with discord, as though struck by some invisible hand. The basilica's defenders stared in disbelief. Men who moments before had expected only death now watched as the tide faltered. They raised their voices in a single ragged cheer, the sound carrying above the battlefield like thunder. The angel, he has broken them. Legolas still stood upon the spire, his bow lowered, his body trembling. His hair was matted with ashen blood, his chest heaved with the strain of the battle, and his eyes burned with exhaustion. Yet they remained steady, fixed upon the horizon where the swarm writhed in confusion. For a moment, just a moment, the impossible seemed true. The devourer had been stayed, but the hive mind was not slain. The pause ended with a psychic scream that split the heavens. The leviathans stirred once more, their wounds knitting, their vast minds rejoining the chorus. The swarm below rallied, convulsions fading, their shrieks replaced by renewed hunger. The pause had not destroyed them, it had only slowed them. Legolas staggered against the parapet, his bow slipping from his hands. His vision blurred, the strain of the hive's backlash pressing against him like a tide determined to drag him under. He felt blood on his lips, warm and metallic. His last arrow was gone, his quiver empty. The song he had loosed had struck deep, but it was not enough to end the hunger. Below, the Inquisitor raised his vox, his voice cold and sharp. The alien has bought us a moment. Nothing more. Prepare fallback routes. This world is doomed. The priest, wild-eyed, turned upon him. Doomed? Do you not see? He has wrought miracle. He is chosen. Chosen? The Inquisitor's reply was a snarl. He is Xenos. His sorcery buys us seconds while the swarm consumes galaxies. Do not mistake defiance for salvation. The soldiers, hearing both voices, faltered. Some clung to the priest's faith, others to the Inquisitor's judgment. Hope and despair clashed across the courtyard as surely as blade and claw. Legolas climbed down slowly, his limbs weary, every step heavier than the last. When he set foot upon the basilica's stones once more, the survivors pressed close. Their eyes begged, their hands reached, their whispers pleaded for assurance. But he gave them no words. His silence was neither promise nor denial. It was only truth. He walked past them toward the tyrant's corpse, where the arrow of the infinite still smoldered faintly within its skull. The ichor hissed as it pooled, filling cracks in the stone. He knelt briefly, placing a hand upon the beast's broken crown. Its flesh was still warm, its body vast and terrible. And yet it had fallen. Even the greatest predator could bleed. The hive shrieked again. The lull was ending. From the plain, new shapes stirred, behemoths yet unseen, their ridges taller than walls, their steps like earthquakes. The sky split wider as more spore pods descended, streaking fire across the ash-dark heavens. The hive fleet was gathering its full might. The sergeant spat blood and straightened his lasgun. Then we fight again, until we're nothing left but bones. The priest raised his relic, tears streaming down his face. And the Emperor shall know our faith. The Inquisitor turned, his black eyes falling on Legolas. And you, alien. Alien, your arrow is spent. What remains of you when the miracle is gone? Savior or heretic? Legolas met his gaze calmly. His voice was quiet, yet it carried through the silence that fell. I am neither. I am only a bow against the dark. If that is enough, then let it be enough. The Inquisitor's expression did not soften, but he lowered his weapon. The swarm roared, its endless tide pressing forward once more. Legolas raised his bow, empty though it was. He knew there would be no more arrows, no more songs to break the hive. But still he raised it. Not for himself, but for the soldiers who stood at his side, for the priest who prayed in trembling faith, for the people who looked upon him with hope and fear alike. He would not give them silence in their final hour. He would give them defiance. The basilica shook with the approach of new horrors. The sky itself seemed to bow beneath the shadow of the hive. Yet upon the walls of the last fortress, an elf of another world stood with bow raised, his eyes bright, his voice steady. "Then let it come," he whispered, and the swarm came. The world was drowned in shadow, the roar of bolters and the chittering of claws, the fire of faith and the fury of hunger. The storm consumed all, and within it, the fate of the archer from another world was swallowed. When silence fell at last, only ash and bone remained. The Imperium would record the battle as another desperate stand upon a doomed frontier world. The Inquisition would write its reports of heresy and anomaly. The Ecclesiarchy would sing of a radiant angel who loosed an arrow that struck the sky, but none would know the truth. That an elf of Middle-earth had stood against the swarm alone yet unbroken, and for one brief moment his song had stayed the endless hunger.